Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. And look who has joined me and Mikey McCubbin today. It's Joe Thomlinson. Welcome back, Joe.
Hello. I'm glad to be here on an international break, piloted in for the most boring week of the season.
Absolutely not. Never like that. Great to have you back. Today, guys, we are talking all things transfers for probably the final time for a little while. But we are going to grade or rate every Premier League club's most expensive signing this window. There's only one place to start. We're doing it alphabetically. We're going to kick off with Arsenal. Eberechi Eze. There is some contention about the fact it could be Martin Zubimendi, but we want to talk about Eze because that's the fresher signing. Joe, you're a big fan of him as a person, I know. Big fan of him as a player. Do you like this for Arsenal?
Yeah, I absolutely love this move. I think we can talk about what it adds to this Arsenal side from like a multifunctional point of view, whether it's in the attacking midfield role or off the left. I just hope that we get to see him played consistently in big games, because I do think he can be a huge difference maker for Arsenal. What we've seen from them this season is they are still going to be extremely solid at the back, but I want them to be a little bit more progressive going forward, and that's hopefully what Eberechi can unlock in that side. I predict him to be starting on that left-hand side pretty consistently from the get-go, really, to be honest with you, given the form of Gabby Martinelli and the excellence of Eze. I really think he can add something different to them from range as well. You know, he's a dangerous player around the edge of the box, and what we can say about Arsenal pretty consistently is that they want to build up quite slowly. Martin Odegaard isn't necessarily going to take that risk of shooting from range. Eberechi Eze is, so I think it's a great fit. I also think, there is something to be said for a mood-lifting signing like this, beating Tottenham Hotspur to the punch. Spurs was so keen on getting that Eze deal over the line. To beat Spurs to him immediately carries favour with the fan base, doesn't he? He almost immediately goes down as like a bit of a club hero straight from the jump. Overall, I love this deal. I think the fee is absolutely fine. He's a good age, Premier League proven, massive output for Crystal Palace. I think he'd taken them about as far as he could. Club legend status at Palace. I think this is an A.
If he is going to start on the left, do you think that's going to require Calafiori to be more of an overlapping fullback? Because that would be my one area of concern with.
I think, look,
Eze
obviously,
playing off the left.
Yeah, Eze, we haven't seen loads of him off the left, probably predominantly because of how Glasner sets up with those two 10s, and he wants to play a little bit more inside. I think maybe he is most naturally suited to the 10 space, and you might well see him in some games utilised alongside Odegaard. Odegaard last season spent quite a prolonged time out with an injury as well, so he might be able to fill in there too. But whether or not it's gone on the outside or coming on the inside, I still think that Eze's one-on-one ability is better than any other option Arsenal have on that left-hand side, to be honest with you. And I also like the addition of Hincapié towards the end of the window, a player we know at Leverkusen very much wants to overlap and get on the outside. When he's played as a left wing-back or as a left-sided centre-back, he's perfectly happy to play on the outside. I'm really interested to see what it means for the future of Miles Lewis-Skelly. The arrival of Hincapié, the start that Calafiori has made to the season, the potential of Eze playing on the left. Does that mean that Miles Lewis-Skelly is going to be considered more in a central midfield role? However it plays out, and whatever position Eze plays, I think it is a first-team upgrade. He raises the floor and he raises the ceiling of this squad.
Yeah. Quickly, Mikey, before we move on, because there's lots of clubs to cover. Arsenal's window as a whole, very, very strong, particularly, as Joe says, in adding depth pretty much all throughout the side.
Yeah, everywhere. I think they have had the most well-rounded window in terms of they signed in every single position. I think pretty much, kind of like what Joe was saying. Like, it doesn't really matter what Eze's best position is. It's the skill set that he brings. It's the fact that he's a great dribbler. It's the fact that at Palace he was the top shot taker. In fact, he was taking more shots for Palace last season than anyone was for Arsenal. And obviously that will change because Gyökeres is the focal point, and he's going to have to be more of a creator, but he's a great creator as well. I think just the skill set more so than what he brings to a position is what's the most important, because for so long Arsenal have been, especially last season, was so reliant on Saka to just make things happen consistently. Now they've got two, or if Odegaard gets back to his best, three players who can do that. It should mean, in theory, that Arsenal aren't going to struggle against low block teams like we've seen them do in the past.
Okay, we need to give it a grade, A star to F. Hopefully not too many Fs today. What are you guys thinking? I think A.
Yeah. Reckon A.
Yeah. Feels solid.
Yeah, okay, let's go for it.
Let's go for A. Come on, let's roll the dice. Let's head to Aston Villa next. This one happened on deadline day. Harvey Elliot, there's a £35 million obligation to buy after 10 appearances, which he'll surely make. I mean, Mikey, we talked about this on our deadline day stream with Carl Anker, but this feels pretty sensible.
Yeah, really sensible. And also £35 million obligation, I think, is a really good fee, given how good Liverpool are at maximising fees for outgoing players. Harvey Elliot is probably the best player they've sold this summer. So to get him on 35 million, I think, it says a lot about the fact that maybe this was one player Liverpool weren't in the best negotiating position with. It's not like he's an academy star who just couldn't quite get into the team. This is someone who was getting quite serious minutes under Jurgen Klopp, especially in his final season, and was putting up really good numbers. And it's, I don't know, from the minutes he was getting last season, it's clear that Arne Slot didn't really rate him as highly as Klopp. When you look at his numbers under Klopp, 8.5 progressive passes per 90, over 3 shots per 90, 2.5 chances being created every 90 minutes. The way that Villa play with that high line, the way that they, manipulate chaotic situations in opposition back lines. I think, Elliot is perfect for that. You also expect him to challenge for a central role as well, and then you've got Rodgers and McGinn also battling there. I guess we're just yet to see exactly what this Villa forward line is going to look like this season, and they've had a really poor start to the year, haven't they? I think they have taken as many shots as Liverpool, but ranks second bottom of the league for expected goals. So something's got to change quickly for Villa. But we've seen them come through really bad spells of form under Unai Emery before. Last season, I don't think they were particularly convincing for the first half of the year and still ended up in a Europa League place. Should have got a Champions League place, really, if they hadn't messed it up on the final day of the season. Would I say it's Eze level? Probably not, just because there's question marks over Villa's attack this season. He's not necessarily just slotting into something that is firing on all cylinders, and Villa, of course, had a difficult summer due to PSR, but he's about as good an attacker, I think, as they could have got from a Premier League club.
Okay, so what are we thinking? Sort of B plus? B?
I'd be up for giving it a B. I mean, I really love Harvey Elliott. I don't know what you guys think. I would be willing to give it a B plus, but
yeah, B, definitely.
I think it's very solid. Right, let's move on to Bournemouth. This was a crazy summer for Bournemouth. It looked pretty nerve-wracking before the season started, but what a start to the season given everything that's gone on at the club. Selling Zabarnyi, Huijsen, Kerkez to Real Madrid, PSG, Liverpool. That just shows how well that defence operated last year. They've got a new goalkeeper, but so far so good. I thought they were absolutely insanely good against Spurs this weekend. I don't think they allowed them even a shot until about the 55th minute, which was absolutely crazy, especially given the sort of confidence that Spurs were going into that game with, having beaten Man City. And Diakhite at Lille was a regular for a number of seasons. I didn't have that many doubts about this, but in terms of an entire new backline, or at least the new combinations, because Senesi has been there obviously for a little while, that was a big question mark going into this season. But I think so far so good. We did a deadline day space on X on deadline day, and we spoke to a Bournemouth fan who said Truffert as well has started exceptionally well, and she was arguing that even looked better than Kerkez, which I'm not prepared to go to just yet, but it does go to show how well they have started. And so far, 5th lowest XG against in the league, given the fact they played Liverpool and Spurs. I think really, really impressive. So Diakhite, it's been a very positive start to the episode, but I don't feel like I can go any lower than a B at the moment.
Yeah, I think for the age, the profile, the players that they lost in the summer as well, this kind of player just slips under the radar, doesn't it? Bournemouth picking up a player like Bafodé Diakhite, just nobody really gets any headlines, but you have to say it feels like immediately he understands Iraola's system. He's got the physicality to match the league. He's a fantastic progressor of the ball. Partnership with Senesi's there. I wonder if they'll keep Smith playing in that right-back role, or with the arrival of Alex Jimenez, whether or not he'll play there from AC Milan. Whatever happens, it feels like Iraola will get it to work. He's just such a good coach.
Yeah, I mean, it says a lot that I think he was signed on the Wednesday and was starting against Liverpool at Anfield on the Friday, which is just insane. And also, I think it's testament to the Bournemouth recruitment system. It's now over a year since Richard Hughes left for Liverpool, but it doesn't look like Bournemouth's recruitment strategy has fallen off in any way. If anything, Diakhite is maybe a more sure bet than Huijsen was a year ago, because he's got 5 years more experience. I think Bournemouth's defence, the worries that we had about it, at the start of the summer, feel like they were premature.
Answered very effectively. Let's give it a B. Let's move on to Brentford, Joe, and talk about Dango Ouattara. Crazy summer for Brentford in terms of outgoings and attack, and they have committed a lot of money to Dango Ouattara, but he played pretty well for Bournemouth in parts last year.
Absolutely, and I know that the fee is large here, and people were kind of mocking Brentford, weren't they, for spending £42 million on Dango Ouattara. But I think people were maybe sleeping on how good of a player Ouattara actually is and how well he fits into this Brentford system naturally. Took his goal really well against Villa. I thought he took his goal against Sunderland really well, even though it was disallowed. Last season, he was putting up, 0.6 non-penalty expected goals and assists per 90 in a Bournemouth side that were dangerous going forward. But, that is similar sort of numbers to Yoanne Wissa. Yeah, age profile is really good. And most importantly, what you want from Brentford forward line is players that work extremely hard off the ball. Mikkel Damsgaard is an incredibly talented player, fabulous player. He's going to create chances all day long, but he works so hard. As does the likes of Kevin Schade, Ad De Bruyne and Burmo last season. And Dango Ouattara is no different. He's in the top 1% of forwards in the Premier League for tackles, interceptions, blocks. Work rate off the ball is amazing. So, yes, it's an overpay. I think we can all agree to that. But I do think they've got a really, really good level replacement for Wissa and Burmo through the door with Premier League experience and can hit the ground straight away.
I also think Brentford were always going to have to overpay, weren't they? Because they got such a big fee out of United for Burmo. He is effectively that replacement, of course. They obviously clearly tried that, their utmost to keep hold of Wissa, but ended up getting a really good fee for him. I guess my one worry with that Brentford forward line is, could they have gone back in for Max Bayer on the final day? That's my one thing. Having got that fee for Wissa, there isn't really a natural backup to Igor Thiago at centre forward. Obviously, Ouattara can play there, but then I feel like the drop off from Ouattara to potentially Reece Nelson or Fabio Carvalho fairly big.
I think Reece Nelson's a really good pickup, man.
He is a good pickup, but I don't know. Has he played enough Premier League football in the last few years to
and
warrant
I think his injury record definitely is questionable. But if you've got him as a backup, you've got Fabio Carvalho as a backup to your two wide options in Kevin Schade and Dango Ouattara. I think it is versatile enough. Reece Nelson in particular really impressed me in pre-season for Arsenal. I thought there was a legitimate case that he might well come into this season starting over Gabby Martinelli in that left wing slot. In terms of natural talent, Reece Nelson is a fabulous footballer. So, yeah, I think the Dango Ouattara move I would give a B for as well. I think it's an overpay, maybe a B- because of the fee, but I think he's a fabulous player.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe
it was
B-.
interesting on the weekend against Sunderland. They seemed to look, and it was at the Stadium of Light, which is absolutely rocking at the moment. Everyone's loving the football Sunderland are playing. Suddenly got a competitive team for the first time in years. But it did feel like they slightly ran out of steam in the final 15, 20 minutes of that game. And it was actually interesting to see that Sunderland put in 4 times as many tackles as Brentford in that game, which isn't really related to Ouattara necessarily, given his position. And I think your call actually earlier this season, Mikey, to not write off Keith Andrews looks a lot smarter than it did necessarily at the time, or it was a good prediction is what I'm trying to say.
I guess also the thing is if Brentford do find themselves 18th or 19th come January, there is no doubt that they... I could see them spending 40-50 million pounds on another forward in January if they need to. Yeah, I'm not feeling too bad about Brentford at the moment, but yeah, if there's a major injury in that forward line, I do have more worries.
Let's move on to Brighton. Now, Brighton had a pretty busy window, as they tend to do, but Brighton tend to buy players sort of 12 months in advance, and I think this also counts for Kostoulas, their top signing, a record fee coming out of Greece as well, £30 million, and it was over double their Greek previous record for a sale, which I think was Daniel Podence. He does look really, really exciting. He's only in his teens, but he came through really last year at Olympiacos. The previous year, he'd been playing in the Youth League as Olympiacos they beat Inter, they beat Bayern, they beat Milan, and they won the entire thing. There's a real feeling that, a bit like Norway in the last couple of years as well, there's this great generation of Greek talent. And it looks like Brighton have got 2 of them as well, in Simas as well. So Kostoulas hasn't really featured so far. I think there's been some concerns with Brighton fans that I've seen online saying we need to see a few more of these new signings. Do we look a little bit short up front in particular? De Kuyper feels like the only one that's really regularly starting at the moment. Whether we see Boscagli come in or Coppola for Lewis Dunk at some stage this season. But Kostoulas, it's very difficult to give him too high a grade because he's barely featured so far. So for now, I think it's probably a C.
Maybe a C, yeah, because it is a fairly big fee, but the upside could be massive. And Danny Welbeck does need, replacing at some stage in the next year or two, doesn't he?
Let's give it a C. Let's move on to Burnley and talk about Leslie Ugochukwu. Joe, because Burnley now have Ugochukwu and Florentino Luis as a central midfield pairing. And Josh Cullen as well is in the mix as well, who started the season pretty well.
Cullen's got to start as the club captain.
Yeah,
this
He's
is
not
true.
being dropped.
But I mean, what a potential trio they've got on their hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see the balance there, right? Like, is Florentino Luis going to come in alongside Ugochukwu? Obviously,
and then have Cullen further forward.
Cullen pushed up the pitch a little bit, but then what does that mean for Hannibal Meshbury? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what Scott Parker does with that midfield balance anyway. It's nice to get another body through the door. Touching on Florentino Luis, that feels like a huge coup, doesn't it? Given that this is a player who was being coveted by some of Champions League level sides, some big Champions League level sides, just 12 months ago. Who's putting up huge defensive numbers, some European leading defensive numbers. We're talking like 6-7 tackles and interceptions a game over in the Portuguese league. But just touching on Ugochukwu, I think this is a really defining season for him personally, because when he arrived at Chelsea from Rennes, there was a big ceiling in that player's career. Like, we were talking about Ugochukwu being a potential leader in that defensive midfield position. He was highly rated in France, had all the physical attributes coming to the Premier League he felt could make a real impact in that Chelsea side. He's great at progressing the ball, big gangly legs to make tackles that nobody expects you to, covers a huge amount of ground, but it didn't really work at Chelsea. He went on loan to Southampton, and it didn't really work at Southampton. I don't think they were particularly happy with the output there. You know, Aribo put up more minutes. I think Flint Downs put up more minutes in the midfield than him. And his career kind of stalled a little bit for a season. Now at Burnley, it feels like he needs to be playing every game in that midfield. I think it was only 18 starts for Southampton last campaign. If it's less than 30 this season, fingers crossed he stays injury-free, I would be really surprised, because he does have the ability and he does have the talent level that makes you think he could really play at a high level. Like, just watching him, the way he flows on the ball is excellent. His tackle numbers are massive, his interception numbers are massive, his progressive carry numbers are in the top 15% of European midfielders. On the ball, his passing range I think needs a little bit of work. He's in the bottom 15% of European midfielders for his progressive pass numbers, but he's still very young. I think he needs a little bit of time, and it will be interesting to see whether or not Burnley's the right environment for that kind of player. I would probably put it middle of the park, right? It's quite a big fee. Chelsea will be happy.
Yeah, I think so. I think it feels like the signing that Burnley might live to regret is more the Armando Broja deal, given the injury history in the last few years, given the fee they invested there. Could they have done something a little bit smarter, potentially dipped into one of Europe's other markets as well, like France or Belgium, and picked up someone with a better injury record? But I think Ugochukwu is a solid pickup. Should we give it a C for now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Chelsea. Joao Pedro, Mikey, has got off to a great start in Chelsea Blue, but I suppose there's a huge situation sort of developing in Chelsea's forward line with Jackson having left and Mark Guiu being recalled from Sunderland. What are your kind of thoughts about Chelsea's forward line and Joao Pedro's start?
Yeah, I mean, I think this signing looks even more important now than it did at the start of the summer. I'll hold my hands up. I wasn't a fan of this move at all in the build-up to it happening, and was very quickly proved wrong with with his performances at the Club World Cup. Having said that, performances at the Club World Cup versus the Premier League, can differ, and I wasn't necessarily convinced that he was going to be firing as he has been at the start of this season. So, yeah, I think this could even be an A+ signing for me, given the context of Chelsea's start to the season. Delap now out for 8 weeks. Cole Palmer, not sure whether he'll be back for after the international break yet. He covers both those positions. Of course, he can cover on the left as well, but Chelsea are pretty well stocked there with Garnacho and Gittins now. Tyrick George staying on as well, so they've got serious depth on the left. I don't expect Joao Pedro to have to play there. And he's also not really a Maresca-style left winger anyway, and I think that's where my concerns were at the time, because I was like, he's not going to displace Cole Palmer in the centre. Is he realistically going to be, picked ahead of Delap at centre forward? No, probably not. Both of those things are true, but with both those injuries, he's invaluable to Chelsea right now. Like, great in the air as well, as we saw against Fulham.
I think when him and Delap are both fit, I think Pedro starts.
Do you think?
Yeah. I do. I think, I love Liam Delap, and I think the reason we saw him starting alongside Delap or in sort of reserve to Delap, playing as that shadow striker against Fulham, is because of the Palmer injury. I think when Palmer returns, I think Joao Pedro is going to be the starting number 9. I think his all-round game at the start of this season has shocked a lot of people. I think his hold-up play is so underrated. He's really strong in the air, so physically ready to play for Chelsea. I think his creativity last season, he was putting up 0.4 expected assist per 90. Like, so good in every facet of the game, Joao Pedro. And the fact that he started the season with confidence in front of goal, 4 goal involvements in 3 games, 2 of them have been goals. He scored goals at the Club World Cup, excellent finish in the final as well. That sort of dinked finish shows a little bit of guile. I think as an all-round package, he will be Maresca's go-to guy in the number 9 role.
Okay, grade though, guys. We need a grade.
A, minimum.
Yeah, I would give it A+ potentially.
I think the
We
fee's
haven't
all
had
right
an
as
A
well.
plus yet. Let's give it him
The
an A+.
fee is all right as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, yeah.
Signing players from Brighton's not easy. £60 million from Brighton, that's a good deal.
Absolutely. Let's move on and talk about Crystal Palace and Yeremy Pino. This almost feels like, when they were linked with Yeremy Pino, I was like, oh, that's a name I haven't thought about that much recently. He's still only 22. It's because when he came through as a sort of 18-year-old, people were really, really excited. He looked like the kind of future of Spanish football, had an ACL tear, took a while out, hasn't necessarily kicked on in the way you expect of him. But for £22 million as well, given the fact that there was even last week talks about a €50 million deal, I think this is a really good move from Crystal Palace as well, especially given the fact he's got a fair amount of experience at international level. He's been capped 15 times. He's played in European competition for Villarreal for a number of years, whether that's the Champions League or Europa League. Can play on both sides as well. And whilst I don't think he's going to be necessarily at the level of Eberechi Eze and potentially never will be, I still think this is a player that can contribute to a side that is pretty well set and pretty functioning, which has kept hold of Mark Guehi as well. I think if they'd lost Mark Guehi, I'd been slightly concerned more for the kind of mood around the place rather than anything, and maybe Glasner's future and whether he'd consider resigning. But now Crystal Palace, I think, can move forward with Guehi staying, Yeremy Pino through the door. I think this is pretty exciting.
Do you know what? I almost think it's undersold how experienced he is for a 22-year-old.
Yeah.
There's only 3 players in any team in Europe's top 5 leagues that has put up more senior appearances at his age. Only 3 players, and they are Jude Bellingham, Bukayo Saka, and Nico Williams. He's level with Florian Wirtz. Like, the experience, given that that's a season out as well with an ACL, he'd probably be up there alongside the likes of Bellingham, Saka, Williams for appearances at his age, is unbelievable. I think that he will adapt pretty well, but I think there are caveats around his size at 5'8". How well that translates to the Premier League is going to be a bit of a question mark. And you're following in the steps of Eze, which I think is a really hard task. He hasn't traditionally played in one of those 2-10 roles. They haven't played that formation at Villarreal. He's played traditionally very wide. He's amazing in 1v1 situations. We know about Pino, as we've known for a long time. He's an excellent dribbler and he wants to hug the touchline and wants to beat his man. But it's a very different system, Glasner. It's going to be tough to be the guy who replaces the guy in Eze. So I think he will need a bit of time to adapt to English football.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, going from a 4-4-2 for years pretty much to a 3-4-3 is a big change. I do really like the fee though, and I think Palace, given the situation they were in with 2 potentially huge players leaving to get in a player of Pino's quality and keep Guehi, I think that's pretty impressive. Should we give it a B-?
I would give it a C, but
really,
I think he's a good. Maybe the fee bumps it up.
Okay.
Also, just the price is amazing. Like a third of the price of Eze.
Amazing. Yeah, maybe a B.
Let's give it a B-. Okay, let's move on to Everton. What a start to the season for Everton. A lot of the new signings instantly clicking. The likes of Jack Grealish and Keane and Dewsbury Hall in particular. No real surprise there. 2 quality additions. But Tyler Dibling was their most expensive signing of the window. Mikey, you pretty hot on this?
Yeah, I'm really hot on it.
I mean, the fee that Southampton were quoting 6 months ago compared to what they actually got him for
is
amazing.
I mean, Southampton were quoting way too much originally, and we could talk about the fee, but like how many like wingers have we seen go for 40+ million this summer? It's still cheaper than what Nottingham Forest paid for Omari Hutchinson, and I actually rate Hutchinson pretty highly. But I think Dibling's got a higher ceiling and looked more impressive in a worse team last year in the Premier League. I mean, top 20 players for attempted take-ons, 2.2 successful dribbles per 90 last season as well for Southampton, a really, really poor Southampton team.
There were some games where he ripped like very good opposition apart. I remember that, Man United weren't very good last season, but the game against Man United, it was crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like he was he exploded onto the scene last year. it really took a lot of people by surprise. I really, really like it. I think that the great thing for Dibling in this move is that he's coming into a team where he's not necessarily going to be starting straight away. I mean, Grealish, Dewsbury Hall and Iliman Ndiaye, just they look like they've been playing for about 5 years together. You know, their connection looks almost telepathic, and so there's not that much pressure on Dibling to come in and straight away, you know, rip up trees. Which is great because he's entering what looks like already like one of the most entertaining forward lines in the league. He's going to have, you know, the space to be able to just come on in the final 20 minutes against, you know, defences that may have been run ragged by Grealish and Diarra already, and you know, take advantage of that. In terms of like impact this season, I wouldn't necessarily give it like a huge score, but in terms of £40 million for a young English prospect who has the entertainment factor to get fans off their seats and has a massively high ceiling, I would put it towards A. Maybe I'm being generous, but yeah,
A for the future. I'm happy with A for the future. Maybe an A- for now.
Okay, yeah, I would probably give it a B+, just because I'm not sure, like Mikey said, the minutes will be there as much this season. I love Iliman Ndiaye playing in that position at the moment, but I think in the future he's going to have a huge, huge impact.
Should we say B+?
Let's go with B+ then. Fine. Let's move on to Fulham. Now, they had a very, very quiet window until it all kicked off in the final 2 days, really. Kevin, club record signing arriving from Shakhtar Donetsk.
Well, they needed wingers. They needed wide talent. You know, I think they needed some excitement as well in those wide areas. And, I mean, certainly Kevin is going to provide that, right? In the Champions League last season, he was extremely dangerous in 1v1 situations. He's going to be so fun to watch. He's a classic Brazilian wide man, wants to beat you up in a 1v1 situation, wants to make you look silly. Very, very explosive. This is a club record fee as well. I think they will be delighted to have seen off that interest from Sporting, because obviously Sporting were desperate to get the deal done late, weren't they, as well? To have beaten a team like Sporting to the punch, I think, is really, really impressive from Fulham's perspective. I think probably the fact he would come and live in London helps towards that situation as well. But yeah, I personally think that they did need wide talent, Fulham. I know that Alex Iwobi is playing out there consistently. I've been incredibly impressed by Josh King at the start of the season. He looks like one of the breakthrough players of the campaign so far. You know, took his goal amazingly well against Chelsea, but his interlinking we've seen in the first 3 games, the fact he's keeping Emile Smith-Rowe out the side, really impressive. And the idea of, you know, a player like Kevin coming into this side, being a starter straight away, Chukwueze coming in, potentially play on the other flank, Iwobi, Josh King, there's a lot of exciting talent there. We talk about Everton across those front 3 positions. I think Fulham's talent on paper looks really, really exciting after deadline day. I think I haven't necessarily seen enough of him outside of the Champions League to give him like an A or a high B, so maybe just a B.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think Chukwueze on loan's really exciting as well. This is a guy that's such an entertaining dribbler, particularly in his Villarreal days. Looked like he'd slightly lost confidence at Milan in the last few years, didn't have a place in their starting 11. Leeds, let's talk about Anton Stach, Mikey. This is a player that you've been a fan of for a long, long time, can play in so many different positions, and he started pretty well at Leeds as well.
Yeah, started really well. I feel like I've recommended him for almost every Premier League club over the last 2 years. And even then, it's a little bit of a risk. So this is, it's a Bundesliga player, huge unit, has played in multiple positions. So, on the one hand, it's like, oh yeah, this guy's perfect. On the other hand, it's like, well, there's the chance that a manager could use him incorrectly because, he'd been playing at times in a centre of a back 3 for Hoffenheim, had been quite a creative player when he played for Mainz before that. So far for Leeds, he's been incredible. I think he's got 19 or put up 19 progressive passes already, which is only one fewer than Moises Caicedo, Xhaka and Sandro Tonali, who are all at this point very proven ball progressors in the league, some of the best in Europe, and he's an absolute unit. His tackle and interception numbers throughout his career have been great, and yeah, he has that ability to break through the lines with his ball carrying as well as his passing, and as a tough tackler. He's even the kind of player that I think would have had should have had an outside shout of being a target for Man United as a backup to Carlos Baleba, such as his physical prowess and his ability to break lines. So I would B+ or A-. He's already a fan favourite as well. I think before he'd even kicked a ball, Leeds fans were raving about him.
I think B+ is very fair. They look maybe a little bit short of goals. I do really like Noah Okafor as a player, but he's much more of a sort of facilitator and a good dribbler as well. Calvert-Lewin under massive pressure already. Let's move on to Liverpool. This was the talk of deadline day, of course. Alexander Isak, £125 million. 6-year contract as well. Look, people have been talking endlessly about Alexander Isak all summer, but Liverpool have now signed 2 of the 4 most expensive players in Premier League history, with Florian Wirtz in as well. There are ramifications of this deal, because if they hadn't have gone for Isak, maybe they put more effort into signing a centre-back. Have they taken a risk with Van Dijk, Konate, Gomez, Leone being their only sort of 4 senior centre-backs? You look at the fact that Joe Gomez has had massive injury issues in the past. Ibrahima Konate's missed at least 8 games in the last 3 seasons. He's missed over 20 games in 2 different seasons in the past as well. I think they have taken a massive risk there. Do they look potentially slightly light in terms of midfield depth as well? If Florian Wirtz is eventually going to end up on one of those 3 positions further forward, potentially. But on paper, this is the signing they wanted. They paid probably £25 million less than Newcastle were quoting, even if it was never going to get to 150. And it's going to kind of make or break their season, because if there's a few defensive injuries in the next month or so, everyone's going to say, yeah, did you need Isak? Especially given
But the
Ekitike
Isak deal
starting so well.
The Isak deal was separate to a defensive reinforcement chase, wasn't it? Because they had the money to do that.
You could have definitely got someone aside from Mark Gehi over the line in the final few hours. It did feel like.
Did they want anyone other than Mark Gehi? They clearly wanted Gehi as the primary target. They had the money to do it. The deal didn't collapse because of them. It collapsed because of Crystal Palace's inability to find a replacement. So I think whether or not Isak was signed or not, it didn't have any bearing on the
They needed 2 strikers for sure, and they got 2 elite strikers. I just think that this will be the defining narrative of the season. Not necessarily whether Isak cost them a defensive signing, but whether Liverpool have made a massive mistake.
There's no mistake signing Isak. There is no mistake signing Isak.
I also think
not going for a centre-back and getting one over the line. Because if Mark Gehi was always going to go down to the wire, I think they probably could have looked in a different direction in the final week or so of the window.
Yeah, potentially. But I mean, they did still get Leone in, right?
They did.
I think
played about 20 professional games.
No, but there's a sense that Gravenberch could step in if it really came down to it. And we've seen the Liverpool midfield just about cope without Gravenberch at points so far this season. I think the thing is with Isak, I was considering okay, well, it's obviously a huge amount of money to pay. I think Newcastle in the end got an amazing fee for him. The player got what he wanted. The club got what they wanted. I think what makes it an A+ signing for me, as obvious as that sounds, is that yes, Liverpool. There's a chance that Liverpool's defensive issues or lack of defensive cover comes back to the bite them at some point this season, and maybe they there's a chance they just about miss out on the Premier League title this season. But even if they do just about miss out on the Premier League title this season, they managed to get Isak ahead of the competition in the Premier League. 6 months ago, Arsenal were the team that were being most talked about and most linked with Isak. They got Isak ahead of Arsenal, and
not just them, like Barcelona and Bayern.
Of course, yeah. If we're talking in the European context as well, got him ahead of the European rivals. But Gyökeres, I think, has come under a lot of scrutiny already at Arsenal, but he has already got 2 goals. One of them very, very well taken against Leeds. But I think if you asked any Arsenal fan back in March, April who they prefer, Isak was the guy to get. My only concern is the development of Ekitike, because Ekitike could be on the level of Isak in 3-4 years' time. And the fact that Isak's come in and, Ekitike might have to play a lot of minutes on the left means that maybe we won't see him develop as quickly as we would have otherwise. But
I also don't
for
really
Liverpool,
subscribe to this idea of him playing on the left of a 4-3-3. He's never really done that.
No.
At Frankfurt, he was occasionally used on the left-hand side of a 2-man attack. But I can't see him replacing Cody Gakpo out on the left-hand side. To be honest, I think he'll just be on the bench, which is absolutely fine because there's loads of games. But it does feel like there's a few different ramifications of this deal. Maybe I'm over-exploring it. And on paper, Liverpool have signed probably, 2 absolutely outstanding, one particularly outstanding striker. And on paper, they've had a phenomenal window. It just does feel like they are short in a number of areas.
It's just an obvious A+. This is the opportunity of the window. They've signed, behind Erling Haaland, the best striker in the Premier League, a player who I think only Mo Salah put up more goals than him last season, didn't he? He's an absolute beast in every single aspect of his game. Whether or not it works with the balance of Ekitike, you've got Isak and Salah going forward. They're going to score you 45 goals a season probably in the Premier League. Man United didn't even score that season-wide last year. I think Ekitike is more than adept enough to play on that left. Having watched him for his first 3 weeks, I think he can absolutely play on that left where Cody Gakpo does. I don't see any problem with his ability on the ball, the way he moves, the way he functions. Those four,
also
unbelievable, man.
Yeah, also if needs be, it does give Slot those options, doesn't it? Because if say Gakpo gets injured, or after 10 weeks of the season we still haven't seen the best of Wirtz, maybe Arne Slot goes, you know what, let's get Wirtz in that left hand role, and actually let's just have Ekitike playing as like a second striker.
Let's see. I would give it an A personally, but you guys can give it an A start if you like.
Let's give it an A.
I mean, also fair play to them. They've gone 9 points out of 9 with a really difficult run of fixtures, but I thought for the first 2 games they were really, really poor. So
yeah,
let's see how
the Arsenal game though, they were a lot more shored up defensively, weren't they?
For sure. Okay, let's move over to Man City and talk about Tijjani Reijnders, Joe, because brilliant start against Wolves. He's been a bit quiet since. City have been pretty disappointing at the start to this season, but Tijjani Reijnders as himself as a signing, surely this is a very good one.
Yeah, definitely. I think the fee's very reasonable as well, £46.5 million. I still think there are question marks about the balance of that Man City midfield. But, we saw Rodri finally returning to the starting lineup at the weekend against Brighton. Great to see him back. He's going to have a massive impact on this Manchester City side. They have lost so much experience this summer. Like, you run through the list of names they've sold this summer or let go. Gundogan, Ederson, Walker, De Bruyne, Kanji, Grealish. That is ripping the experience out of the dressing room, and clearly it's going to be a transitional year for Manchester City and Pep Guardiola. But a player like Tijjani Reijnders, I think, goes a long way to quell some of those worries because of his multifacetedness in midfield. He can play a little bit further forward. I think he's an underrated goal scorer. The volume of goals he scored last season for Milan really slips under the radar, and you saw how well he can take his goals in that opening day victory against Wolves, didn't you? He's also a great playmaker, but he just has the physicality that suits this league, I think. It doesn't feel like the game's going to pass him by. Overall, I think it's pretty much a spot-on signing, but I do think some of Manchester City's recruitment this summer has question marks about it, particularly defensively. What we saw of Manchester City last season was a team that was far too easily exposed on the break, far too open at the back. And you look at the defensive reinforcements that have been brought in. What have they done to quell that situation? I think there is legitimate questions to be answered there. I can't wait to see Donnarumma in net. Shame for James Trafford. Obviously, it means he's probably going to take that number 2 shirt. Well. Yeah, but, when market opportunities like that arise, I think you probably have to jump on it. And they are getting one of the best goalkeepers in world football for a fee that is...
Do you think they might come to regret spending over 50, 60 million pounds on 2 goalkeepers when they don't have a right back?
No, I think they've got... this is a situation where Ederson was seemingly going to leave the club or wanted to leave the club, so they were going to leave themselves a little bit short maybe. And they've got maybe the best 2 goalkeepers in terms of a duo in the league. I think Alisson and Mamardashvili might have something to say about that as well. But as a 1-2, I think it is absolutely astounding. And I don't think that the Donnarumma move had any bearing on the decision not to sign a right back. The money was there, the funds were there. They could have signed a right back at any stage this summer. They went for Tino Livramento and that deal went cold. And they decided Matheus Nunes is going to be the guy to go forward. It's not as if Donnarumma or a right back was going to be signed. The Donnarumma opportunity is a market opportunity that very rarely crops up, and people will have question marks about whether or not he has the ball playing ability to fit into this Pep Guardiola system, and they might well be legitimate, but at 30 million quid, it's a risk worth taking.
It's definitely a great deal for sure. I seriously think they'll live to regret not signing a right back. I don't see
they're very open to
a full competition campaign, and you're playing Matheus Nunes or Rico Lewis at right back with Ait Nouri at left back. I think you live to regret that.
I think I can see Kusanov having to be moved back there if the issues continue.
Or John Stones maybe.
But for Reijnders, I would give this move an A.
Reijnders by himself. What grade did you give it, Joe?
I think an A, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. Right, let's move on to Man United because there's plenty of teams still to get through. Banjamin Sesko is the record signing this summer, at least £73.7 million signing from RB Leipzig. Mikey, it's super early days with Sesko. He's barely featured in the Premier League, in fact. But yeah, how do you reflect on this signing? How do you reflect on Man United's window?
Yeah, I mean, Sesko could turn out to be an amazing signing, but we obviously haven't seen him, start a Premier League game yet. I imagine with the Cunha injury, we may well see him finally start after the international break, though that's going to be, against Man City. So
he didn't have a pre-season, did he?
Didn't have a pre-season. The thing I've noticed with Man United so far this season is that when they start with Cunha, Mount and Mbeumo, the attack functions really well, aside from the total lack of someone making that final run into the box for that final ball. And so you're crying out for someone like Sesko to be there, because he clearly is someone, when he is on the pitch, he is taking up those positions. The problem when Sesko comes on is that there's something missing from build-up. And so I think that is a teething issue that we're going to see Amorim work through for probably the first couple of months of the season, is how, do you embed Sesko into that side and also make him a part of build-up? Because Mount started the season really well, Cunha started the season really well, so did Mbeumo. Unlike with the Isak and Donnarumma deals, Man United spending that money on Sesko, I think directly did, affect their inability to, sign someone like Baleba when the asking price was so high, and, Man United's lack of a plan B for Baleba, I think could come back to bite them this season. We've already seen how open that midfield can be.
Do you think Ruben Amorim should be doing better with the midfield options he's got, though? I feel like people have just kind of ruled out Casemiro, Mainu, Ugarte, Bruno. It's just not workable.
I think he can be, but in order to do that, he's got to change the midfield setup, I think. And so far, he's been so stubborn in terms of his midfield system that I don't know when or if that would ever happen under Ruben Amorim. I think that's my kind of main concern, is that United do have quite a rigid midfield system, one that requires so much physicality. Amorim doesn't really seem to trust anyone other than Casemiro, who, when he has been on the pitch, has been really good, but does seem to tire late in games. I mean, I don't know what you think, Joe. Is this
I think Amorim's doing the right thing with Sesko, bleeding him in slowly. I think it's the smart thing to do is to not throw him into the middle of the storm. And Manchester United at the moment, right now, are in the middle of the storm. it is 100% a fact. We can all see it when we watch them. And Mbeumo and Cunha are going to be relied upon far more than Sesko at the start of this season. I spoke to Ruben Amorim a few weeks ago, and he said the pressure is not on Sesko. Don't expect big things from Sesko. The pressure is on Mbeumo and Cunha to start the season well. They know this league. And I think Mbeumo in particular, I think Cunha's been great as well, but Mbeumo, at the weekend, I thought was his best performance. It looked really sharp, had some great chances, should have probably scored another goal as well, and has actually started the season well. As has Mason Mount, by the way, who, we're talking about
the highest XG in the league.
Yeah, the highest XG, the most shots, the most touches in the box. So I think in that area, it's not like they're not creating chances. They should have been 3-4-0 up against Burnley at half-time. And maybe if Sesko was on the pitch, there would have been a couple of goals. But I know that it's painful at the start, but I think it is the right decision from Amorim to bed him in slowly and try and avoid him from being in the storm too much.
But do you think the Sesko signing in the context of United not signing a midfielder, do you think that's potentially a mistake this season?
Not necessarily the Sesko signing. I think United clearly needed a number 9. I think there are no question marks about the fact United needed a genuine number 9 this summer. I think whether or not United needed 2 number 10s, I think is a legitimate debate, given that Bruno can play in the 10, Mount can play in the 10, Kobbie Mainu, Ruben Amorim has spoken about potentially playing in the 10, Ahmad clearly can play in that inside position as well. So there is potentially a bit of debate around there. I think there's no doubt United needed a number 9. I think United needed Sesko. Whether or not they needed 2 number 10s might be a bit of a debate. A goalkeeper and a midfielder were desperately needed. The goalkeeper got over the line on the final day. The midfielder never happened. But you can't solve all of Man United's issues in one summer. You can't do it. And I think give Sesko a little bit of time. He's clearly got extreme level talent, and I think it's important not to throw him in the middle of a storm. If United can put together 2 or 3 good results, and there's a bit of good feeling around the club, and there's some positivity, and that's when Sesko can start getting bedded in. It's a much easier situation for everybody involved.
I agree. I think that's very wise. I mean, we'll see in the next few matches. You guys do have a difficult run of fixtures. City away, Chelsea home, Brentford away, Sunderland home. Those 2 much more winnable, but then Liverpool away. So tough next few weeks.
Should we say C for now? Sesko?
Low. That feels harsh. He hasn't really played. Should he B minus?
Can be minus.
Let's go B minus. Okay, let's talk Newcastle. We've got loads of teams to get through. Newcastle, Nick Woltemade. I really like Nick Woltemade. I think he's a fantastic player, but it's a big ask. You're coming in, final few days of the window. You've had 1 year at Stuttgart, having been signed on a free before you're becoming the club record signing. He is an interesting profile for the Premier League in that he's not very quick, but he's 6'6", and he has an absolutely phenomenal touch. He's got great awareness. He plays, and I'm not comparing him to this player, but there's a bit of Zlatan about him in terms of his style. There's almost a bit of Dennis Bergkamp as well. This is the most un-6'6" player you'll ever come across. But we haven't seen that many Bundesliga forwards instantly adapt to the Premier League that quickly, who had more experience than Woltemade in Nkunku and Sancho and even Havertz and players like that. But this is an exciting signing, and they do have Wissa, who does know the Premier League very well, to play maybe the first few weeks of after the international break. So in terms of what you're buying in terms of potential, in terms of the season he had at Stuttgart, which was really only half a season of starting regularly, but finished like a train, then going into the under-21 Euros and being absolutely phenomenal as Germany made the final, there's great ingredients there. But this is just a big ask coming in to replace Alexander Isak, even if you're sharing the duties. But on paper, I really like it. I'd probably give it a B.
I think he can play up front with Wissa. I think there's, people will say as a front two, and Wissa could play off Woltemade. I think there's a chance Woltemade could play off of Wissa.
Yeah.
When people look
at the tip of the midfield three.
Yeah, at times, yeah. And obviously, I know they don't want to break up that midfield three of Tonali, Bruno G, Joe Linton. It's exceptional. It's one of the best in the league. But I think it offers the option to play Woltemade in front of a double pivot of Bruno G and Tonali as well. Jacob Ramsey can also offer an option in there as we know. But like you said, I don't think Woltemade is a traditional target man. I don't see him playing every game through the middle. Even for the Germany under-21s the summer, he was basically playing as a number 10, playing off of players, getting involved in link-up. His feet are amazing. And Wissa played every minute last season as a number 9, spearheading a front three. So I would start with Wissa in that number 9 shirt. I know that Woltemade has cost more money and is this sort of high-profile, shiny new thing where it's like, a bit of unknown quantity about him. But if Wissa is fit, which there's question marks about, right? He hasn't had any pre-season and he hasn't even really been training with the team, I don't think, has he, at Brentford? I think he will probably play at the number 9 and Woltemade could play just off him. It just offers loads of options, right? They feel like they've got 4 or 5 different functional ways of attacking now under Eddie Howe. 2 wide players, they could play with 2 forwards, play with 1 forward, they could play with Ramsey in the forward area.
They're in a good position.
It's very exciting
really
for Newcastle. I think that squad is really, really good and they've got one of the best coaches in the league.
Compared to, the narrative around Newcastle, mid to late July where they were getting rejected left, right and centre, I think they've quietly had one of the best windows in the league. We don't need to dwell on it too much, but I think amazing fee for Isak, and yes, they've had to overpay. Given how long that saga went on, they've had to overpay for 2 striker targets. But Wissa, although his age profile isn't the best, he away from the elite players, he's as much a guarantee of 15 goals in the league as there is. Only Erling Haaland was getting on the end of more high quality chances than him in the whole league last season from open play. As for Woltemade, I don't think he's necessarily, I don't even think he's necessarily top 3 Newcastle signings this summer. So I don't know if I could give it higher than a B- or a C. But
see, that's so
in terms of I don't know. I feel like also it's testament to recruitment teams this summer. Like I don't think there have been many. I don't even know if we'll see a player lower than a D in this episode. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you guys.
Let's go B. B. Manuel Neuer calls him Woltemade, which is good fun as well. Right, let's move on to Nottingham Forest and talk about Amari Hutchinson. Joe, Nottingham Forest went forward crazy this summer, and Amari Hutchinson was brought in for £37.5 million.
Yeah, again, it's a big fee. And I think it's almost being used as this sort of derisory player right now in a lot of winger narratives, which I think is really harsh on Amari Hutchinson. People go, well, look at that fee compared to Amari Hutchinson who costs, that much money. This is a really high-level talent, a player who was excellent for England at the under-21s in the summer, who was pretty impressive for an Ipswich side that sucked for most of last season. He hasn't got loads of Premier League pedigree, but what I like about this move, a little bit like Tyler Dibling, is that he doesn't have to start every week. With the arrivals that they've made, even players like Ndoye, who has hit the ground running, seemingly, he doesn't have to come in and be relied upon immediately to suddenly replace Anthony Elanga, who was excellent last season at Forest. But he fits the profile of how Forest play. Excellent in transition, very fast on the counter-attack, offers good cover going backwards, really technical. He could play in the 10 as well if they need him to. Obviously, Morgan Gibbs-White is going to eat up most of those minutes. But
I guess this is the one thing, Omari Hutchinson
He's good enough to.
and McAtee both occupy similar kind of positions, right?
And
They both
Backler.
they almost have too much depth in one position there. Like James McAtee left Man City because he wanted minutes. Omari Hutchinson got tons of minutes at Ipswich last year. That would be my one worry, is is there going to be a little bit of upset over minutes in that
Still
94
got Chris
side?
Wood, you still got
No, I
Hudson
don't think
Odoi.
so. I don't think so. I think that the minutes will be available for them because of the European competition. They had to bed out that squad because of Europe, right? Like they couldn't go into that Europa League campaign with a similar sort of squad depth to what they had in that forward line last year. It would have just been totally unsustainable. And also what they've done very smartly, in my opinion, is they've kind of future planned, right? Morgan Gibbs-White, yes, he signed the new contract, and I don't believe it's got a release clause, but it still wouldn't be a massive surprise if a super club came in for him, would it, next summer, and there was some sort of gentleman's agreement behind the scenes to say, like, 1 more year from you, we'll get a bigger fee, and then you'll be allowed to leave. If that happens, James McAtee's already 12 months into the shirt, he knows the system, he knows the club, he's ready to fill in that role. I think Omari Hutchinson is like a Swiss Army knife that can play left, right, through the middle. He's obviously going to want to operate on the right, but he's so technically good, Omari Hutchinson, that I think this is another smart bit of business by Forest, even though it is probably an overpay. I don't like the narrative of people banging on about this fee.
Fair enough. I think I kind of need to have one that's lower than... I don't think I've put anyone lower than a B so far. And for me, Omari Hutchinson, compared to the rest of them, given their depth in that area, didn't feel as necessary. So I would potentially give it a C. Mikey.
I don't
That's
mind
fine.
it. I don't mind it. Yeah, I also have my concerns about game time.
Okay, let's talk about the Black Cats and Habib Diarra. I'm in absolute dreamland, lads. Only Liverpool and Chelsea have picked up more points than Sunderland in the opening 3 games. Absolutely beautiful
Crazy.
stuff. There are a
Crazy.
few other sides on 6 points, to clarify. And look, we needed to bank points early. We had statistically one of the easiest runs a newly promoted side has ever had in terms of the opponents and where they finished the previous season in our opening few games. We've got Crystal Palace next, which will be a far bigger test. But yeah, Habib Diarra has made a massive, massive impact in this new look midfield. Granit Xhaka is playing a kind of quarterback role as a sort of 6, which is a role he hasn't really played since his days at Arsenal, where he was never particularly effective at it. But so far it's worked really well. He's got Siddiqui on the left-hand side and Habib Diarra, just this massive running threat alongside him. We're not going to dominate possession. We're going to play in transition, but it looks really effective so far. And Granit Xhaka's ability to pick passes out in the final third, which we knew from last year, well, we knew from his entire career, really. I mean, only Joshua Kimmich played more passes into the final third than him in the entirety of Europe last year. And so far, he's 4th in the Premier League, behind Caicedo, Murillo and Elliot Anderson. And for a side like Sunderland that aren't going to see that much of the ball, having someone that can retain possession so effectively and play those tricky through balls, etc., is going to be absolutely vital. And only Newcastle are conceding fewer shots per game than Sunderland as it stands. And yes, that's partly due to opposition and the standard of opposition, but Granit Xhaka and his ability to hold on to the ball, absolutely vital. And then Habib Diarra looks like this amazing running threat, only 21 years old, starting regularly for Strasbourg for the last 3 seasons. He was captain of Strasbourg as well. Without the sort of standard of signings like Habib Diarra, like Granit Xhaka, we don't sign Geertruida on the final day. We don't get Brobby in. We don't get Alderete at centre-back as well. These are players that I think could play for mid-table Premier League clubs, and they're all at a newly promoted side as well. So Habib Diarra, I think, has been solid so far.
Give it an A+, Dougie. Give it an A+.
I'll give it an A. It feels too biased. Let's move on to Spurs. Xavi Simons. Joe, this is a satisfying one for them, given he was linked to Chelsea, although they never made a bid all summer. And they did need a 10, and they got one in Xavi Simons.
Fantastic bit of business. What a brilliant signing this is. And I think the fee is totally reasonable, £52 million. It's going to feel like a snip come the end of the campaign. Obviously, Eberechi Eze was the backup to the first choice, which was Morgan Gibbs-White. So this is really the third choice, but it might well be the best choice for Spurs. I'm not saying he's a better player than Eberechi Eze or Morgan Gibbs-White, but I think the way Thomas Frank wants to utilise that position, Xavi Simons fits in perfectly into that role. His progressive ability, I think, is going to add so much to Spurs. What you saw against Bournemouth at the weekend was a real inability to get through the thirds, and Xavi can do that with his dribbling, with his passing, with his skills. Like, his actual technical ability is like, he's such a pretty footballer to watch. Anybody who's watched any of him at Leipzig or even when he was in the Eredivisie will know, like, on the ball, he's just a joy to behold. I'm interested to see how he matches up physically. He is very slight, he is small. How well is that going to translate to the Premier League, I think, is a question mark for me, but he's got the technical ability to do it. I think it's one of the most exciting Spurs signings I can ever remember, to be honest with you. You know, arriving with this sort of ceiling, this sort of talent level, you don't necessarily always associate with Spurs. It feels like they usually are shopping in a slightly different market, whereas Xavi Simons, if he went to a Barcelona or a Real Madrid, you'd be going, okay, I can see that. So Spurs here, I think, have got a real coup on their hands. I think the fee is great, the player is great, the fit is great. And I loved some of his quotes, you know, talking about how Thomas Frank convinced him to join by saying, these are your weaknesses, this is what I'm going to improve. A lot of the other coaches he'd spoken to were sort of hyping him up and saying, this is the best parts of your game. Thomas Frank went in there and said, these are the problems in your game. This is what I'm going to go in there and change. I think that speaks a lot about the quality of Frank as a coach, and he's going to improve a lot about Xavi Simons' game.
I think Frank's he's perfect for him culturally. I think because you know when you think about Xavi Simons' career, like going between academies, not quite making it. Like Thomas Frank, like that was his bread and butter at Brentford before he was the guy who transitioned players from the B team, which was made up of players who'd been released by more elite academies. Like Thomas Frank has the kind of man management skill set for someone like Xavi Simons. If you look at the quality that they've brought in across the team, making the Danso signing permanent, then Palhinha, who started brilliantly in midfield, Kolo Muani coming in on loan on the final day, that seemed to, that didn't even seem to get that much fanfare, but they've got a really, really top centre forward who can also play on the left, in on a loan as well, risk free. I think Tottenham have had a pretty good window.
For sure. I give it an A-star as well. I think when Maddison and Kulusevski come back, the attacking options that Frank's got at his disposal are pretty frightening. Let's move on to West Ham. Just West Ham and Wolves to go. Mateus Fernandes, Mikey. They needed some legs in midfield. I think he impressed at Southampton. It's a fairly sizable fee at £38 million, but they needed someone in there.
A bit like with Dibling. I think Southampton have done well to get relegated and then get those fees for those players. I think they've done really, really well. But Mateus Fernandes last year, a little bit like Dibling, was a real shining light. He looked Premier League ready almost from the word go.
Still so young as well.
Yeah, really skillful, really creative, but has those physical attributes, has that work rate that, West Ham sorely need, after those opening performances. But actually, again, I think West Ham, you'd hope, and I still do have some faith in Graham Potter. I think their window, given all the chat about them not having a sporting director, having no direction seemingly, I don't know, Malik Diouf, Fernandes, Magassa, I don't think that's that bad a window. Igor Julio as well coming in for depth at centre back. Walker Peters coming in on a free. Callum Wilson looked pretty bright on the weekend as well.
I think they could have done with a higher standard centre back is the one thing I'd say.
They could have, but I think
on loan.
That's
my one concern.
I'd agree that maybe that's one area where they've lacked. But given the kind of competition they're up against, given the kind of quality of players that sides like Bournemouth are able to get, I think without a sporting director, I think West Ham haven't done too badly this window. I still back them to stay up with the quality that they have in that side. Paquetá as well, keeping hold of him. I think is massive. It is absolutely massive. I like the Fernandes deal.
For sure. That 3-0 win against Forest, absolutely massive before the international break.
Did we give Xavi Simons a grade, by the way?
I don't know whether we did. I'd personally give it an A star.
I give it an A, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, sweet. Fernandes, I'd be happy to give a B to.
Yeah,
I think
that seems about fair. Joe, let's talk about Wolves. Tolu Arokodare, signed from Genk late in the window. As you can tell by my pronunciation, haven't seen that much of him, but 6'6", had a good goals record in Belgium last year, and they've kept Strand Larsen, but Wolves this window, I've seen so many Wolves fans complaining about a lack of depth in midfield. There's a lot of negativity around Wolves at the moment.
Yeah, and you can understand that when you lose key assets like Cunha and Nouri and don't necessarily get what they think are comparable replacements, although we haven't seen, John Arias yet, Fer Lopez, very limited minutes, so let's give these guys a chance because Fer Lopez in particular, extremely high ceiling. Tolu, I think, is going to be really interesting. Amazing record in Belgium. Certainly has the physical profile, you would think, to fit in that forward line of how Vitor Pereira operates, given that Strand Larsen, big unit, very much a target man centre forward. 14 goals last season. Tolu comes in 6'6", leading the line for Genk last year, golden shoe winner. I think it's going to be interesting to see if he utilises them as a front two.
Yeah,
is he going to go battering Rams up there, given that the goals aren't really flowing?
Yeah.
If it is, I mean, I love it. 6'6" striker and a 6'4" striker.
That's your dream.
Playing in like a 3-5-2. It's going to be a bully fest, isn't it? If not, it's an adequate backup because I think they needed that. You know, Strand Larsen had a little bit of transferitis, I think, didn't he? Midweek, didn't play. Head of that potential move to Newcastle that never happened. But that's the biggest deal of the window for Wolves, being able to keep Strand Larsen, being able to turn that money down. It was a significant amount of money at £55 million bid, but to turn that down for a player who scored 14 goals in the league last season, I think those goals will be the difference between keeping them up and sending them down. So vital they kept Strand Larsen, and they've even added more goals now.
Yeah, for sure. It does feel like Wolves, West Ham, Brentford and the newly promoted sides. It's going to be a real dogfight down there for sure. What should we give Tolu Arokodare as a grading? It feels a bit harsh. He hasn't even played yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen enough of him, to be honest with you.
Should we give him a C? Let's give him a C. Or maybe that's more on Wolves' window. That feels a bit harsh. Guys, thank you so much for watching the Lowdown for this week. That was rating every club's most expensive signing. Big thanks to Joe for joining us. Thanks to Mikey as ever. And we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.